Hello. I love wine. That seems the best place to start. Genetically, historically, and ancestrally, I come from cultures who evolved with and loved wine, and I've inherited and embraced all of that, and then some. These are the dark days in the Northern Hemisphere, the days when we can tell stories of our ancestors and teachers while their spirits slumber, as the sun dies and is reborn to start the cycle of life anew. These are the days of reflection, of thanksgiving, of quiet. We live these days and nights now, as Wendell Berry says, quote, by lives we don't intend, lives that exceed our thoughts and needs, outlast our designs, staying by passing through, surviving again and again, the risky passages from ice to warmth, dark to light, end quote. I recently visited Hermit Woods Winery in Meredith, New Hampshire. You might remember Hermit Woods from an episode I released back in November of 2023, and I very much recommend listening to it if you haven't. They make an array of diverse, stunning, and awarded wines, one of which was honored as New Hampshire's Craft Beverage of the Year a few years ago, and others of which have been selected as among the best tasting and blind tastings with Bordeaux and Rhone blends, etc. And the amazing thing about all of their wines is that there's not a grape in any of them. You heard that right. These are wines made with local ingredients like berries, currants, tomatoes, rhubarb, rose hips, apples, peaches, honey, and much more. They will blow your mind if you get a chance to try them, and I hope you do. They are unique in the world in terms of creativity, innovation, craft, and flavor excellence. And they represent a tradition of folk winemaking that embraces whatever grows well locally to where you live, rather than trying to force someone else's wine culture onto your land. I've featured episodes with several similar folks like Botanist and Barrel in North Carolina and Wild Texas Wines in, of course, Texas. And they all make amazing, creative, stunning beverages, wines. And there are more to come, for sure. But more than the experience of exploring Hermit Woods' utterly unique wines, I was reminded that wine is really not about wine. What is wine for? We don't often ask that. Wine is a conduit for and expression of several human physical and psychological needs. Wine is a vehicle for deliciousness and sensual pleasure. It is also a means to intoxication and social lubrication. It is also a means of preserving calories and energy and serves as a currency for trade. Lastly, but definitely not least, wine can be a medium for sacramental and spiritual experiences. All of these purposes are important, and none should be taken for granted. And they remind us that so much of the critique and evaluation of wine from a decontextualized perspective, whether it's the alcohol discussion or whether we're talking about a single species grape wine in terms of flavor and aroma profiles and a score on a 100-point scale. These are so irrelevant to what wine is as to be almost absurd. Of course we want wine to taste good. Sensual pleasure is in many ways the gateway to all the other experiences that wine can give us. But we also know that good is highly subjective. Taste is a huge spectrum with a very large middle that we could call good. And most often where a wine falls in that middle of the spectrum is of little importance if we drink it within contexts that are socially scintillating or spiritually enlightening. A wine has to be extremely good or extremely bad to stand out for its flavor if you're falling in love with the person with whom you're drinking it. Because it's not about the wine. The wine is a means of creating ambiance inside you, as much as music can create the ambiance around you. At Hermit Woods, I drank delicious wine while meeting new people, having deep, engaging conversations, and listening to beautiful live music, all thanks to Bob, Chuck, and Ken, the guys who make Hermit Woods special by prioritizing making wine that reminds us of why we do wine in the first place, regardless of what it's made with. Their wine, which is to say the life that they've infused into what they are doing with Hermit Woods, made me fall in love with wine all over again. And that's the only way I know how to evaluate whether a wine is good or even great. As you may know, I'm producing a conference this January 26th at UC Davis called Embracing Hybrid Grapes in California. The schedule, by the way, is now up on the website where you can also get tickets at embracinghybridgrapes.com. And this is really a wine conference for the whole wine industry and everyone who loves wine, even if you only work with or drink vinifera, maybe even especially if you only work with or drink vinifera, because the secret about embracing hybrid grapes is that it's not about hybrid grapes. Our wine community has come to a standstill. The way we think about wine is as if grape wine made with a few favorite vinifera varieties is the highest and best that we can achieve with wine. While a lot of hard work and love went into getting us to this point, the problem is that we've created an apex culture, a culture that has reached its highest expression. So our job is no longer to innovate or be creative, but to conserve and protect this kind of wine. This culture is inherently conservative and protectionist rather than dynamic and adaptive. And we've gone to extremes to preserve this culture. In the soil, this culture must be grown on another culture's roots. Above the ground, this culture must be sprayed with chemical poison so that it can remain viable and productive. All of this is done to keep this culture the same, motionless, you might say stagnant, because of our belief that it is unimprovable. But there's another way to think about wine. Instead of preserving an unchanging culture, wine can become a process of adaptation. We can begin to see wine as a way of embracing evolution and aiding it, of innovating, of being creative. Personally, I'm pro-creativity. Hybridization is not meant to be a way to replace Cabernet Sauvignon with Cabernet Sauvignon 2.0. It's a way for us to let life once again flow through us and our wines as an unending current. We aren't trying to achieve the best. We're getting out of the corner we painted ourselves into and starting to dance again. This is about journeying, not heading towards a destination. The only destination in life is death, and some might argue it's part of the journey as well. In other words, it's all life. Life is what we keep exploring and investigating and reflecting on and relating to with wine. This magical mystery tour of energy that every once in a very rare while becomes more and more complex and aware during these mind-bogglingly brief moments in the vastness of time and space, and wants to experience the thrill of being itself in a million different ways. This is the secret behind our love of and relationship with wine. In the first chapter of Martin Prechtel's book, The Unlikely Peace at Chuchimacquic, he describes the difference between the love of racing and the love of running. The school coaches, he says, were representatives of that neurotic, competitive need to dominate culture trait that characterizes most large civilizations, and they always felt like they'd failed in life unless they could conquer someone else. They needed to win, needed to cause someone else to lose. And Prechtel contrasts this with the indigenous boys who knew that they were, quote, made of elegant motion, and that, quote, living and running were holy things you were supposed to get good at, not things used to conquer, win, and get attention for. Running was not meant for taking, but for giving gifts to the holy in nature, end quote. In some of the most beautiful pages of writing I've ever read, he goes on to describe how real cultures understand that life is a race that cannot be won, but that it is, quote, a gift of the world's diverse, beautiful motion that must be maintained, end quote. So I'm not looking to build a better Cabernet through hybridization. I'm looking to embrace the elegant movement of life that feeds more life. I think this is the culture we need if we want real regeneration. The Unlikely Peace at Chuchimacquic is my first book recommendation, and there's a few more here I'm going to take a minute to give. And for all the ways that book changed me and gave me new ways of seeing, one of my favorite things about it was that there is a tree that has a starring role in the story, the Tree of Time, which is a real tree that could not be killed despite many attempts. I love stories with trees as main characters, and I think some of the most popular stories of all time have trees at their center, but that's a story for another time. My next book recommendation is, and it's related, Changes in the Land by William Cronon, considered to be the first ecological history, and it's an amazing look at how European settlement in what we now call northeastern North America altered the landscape there. Highly recommend this book. Might surprise you in several ways. Everyone should read it, but especially everyone who lives in that part of the world. And while I'm on ecological histories, 2 years Before the Mast is a first-person account of a college-bound upper-class Bostonian who took a gap year to serve as a seaman on a merchant vessel that sailed around Cape Horn to get to California because it was 1836. There was no Panama Canal yet, and California was governed by Mexico. If you have any interest in the age of sails, this book is incredible. It's a memoir. In fact, the terminology and language at times is so out of use, I barely understood entire paragraphs. But it was the time spent in California that I loved and learned from as much as the high seas adventures. His description of us Californians is timeless and as accurate then as I'm sure it is now. Quote, "The men are thriftless, proud, and extravagant, and very much given to gaming. And the women have but little education and a good deal of beauty, and their morality, of course, is none of the best." End quote. He goes on to say, and I'm paraphrasing, that California has amazing potential, but that it's such an idyllic place of Adenic bliss that it would likely corrupt anyone who lived here for very long and turn us all into lazy, vain layabouts. And look, I gotta say, he wasn't too far off here. I mean, this is the place that spawned Jeffrey Lebowski, so his words may have been prophetic. All joking aside, the really crazy part of the story is seeing the beginnings of globalization and the global economy we all take for granted now. The author, Richard Henry Dana, and the entire crew took 2 years of their lives to sail to California and back. But this was before gold was discovered in California, so it wasn't the get-rich mania that brought them. They undertook this life-threatening journey to get skins, specifically cowhides. They spent months sailing up and down the California coast, gathering, tanning, and packaging tens of thousands of cowhides. Yes, they also ate a lot of beef. But the whole ship ate like 1 bullock per week. So what was done with all the other cows that were slaughtered for their hides? And what kind of condition were the lands in where they raised all these cattle? Behind this book is the tale of extraction, of the building of trade routes to mine California's and the world's resources to enrich faraway investors. It's a story we continue to participate in today. Now, the last 3 book recommendations, and these might be the most juicy of all. First, of course, the book I'm now recommending for the 3rd time, The Light Eaters by Zoe Schlanger. Zoe investigates all of the studies that are being done around the planet into plant intelligence, although intelligence is a word that is extremely limited by our language and intelligence. By the end of the book, she realizes that humans are just one kind of person. And her book helps us to begin to see the incredible questions that we've only begun to ask, which acknowledge the diversity of the other members of our community. Remember, our ancestors and elders were green, and they still are. This year, I also read The Immortality Key by Brian C. Murarescu, which proposes an interpretation of history based on some very intriguing evidence in which psychedelics played the starring role in the foundation of our civilizations, religions, and most sacred beliefs. Beyond this, it made me realize how reductive my thinking about wine has been. I thought of wine as, well, wine, but as I've already mentioned, wine has always been just a conduit for bringing us into relationship with the fundamental parts of who we are. Wine is literally a solvent that we, historically, have infused with meaning and medicine and blends of chemicals that can transform our understanding of life and even allow us to confront our own deaths without dying. How quaint must our modern, grapes-only wine seem to our ancestors? I envision a woman with silver streaks braided into her black hair and galaxies in her eyes, patting us on our whittle heads and kindly saying, "Oh, that's nice of our whittle bottles of grapey, juicy wine," while she ladles a liquid from a cauldron and says, "Now, taste the abyss." Okay, my bonus wildcard book recommendation of 2025. If you haven't read it, buckle your seatbelt. Reading Against the Machine by Paul Kingsnorth may shake you to your core and leave you at times with chills. Strangely, one of the best ways I can think of to recommend this book is to say that I disagree with many things that Paul says, but I still recommend it. And I felt the need to immediately re-listen to it as soon as I was done with the first listen. Paul was a full-fledged environmentalist and practicing Wiccan, and he's now an Orthodox Christian. And that's barely the tip of the iceberg of this book, which has its own dense reading list that includes everything from Genesis to Rudolf Steiner to Wendell Berry to Jacques Ellul to Simone Weil and many, many others. I may not agree with all of it, but Against the Machine is onto something, or at least parts of it are. I almost didn't recommend this book. And if you read it, I can't promise that you'll thank me, but I can promise that you'll be thinking about it for a while, and I'd love to hear your thoughts if you do. With all of these book recommendations, I should mention that I haven't written as much for Beyond Organic Wine in the past few months because I've been working on my own book. It's coming out in the fall of 2026, and it's titled Wine Liberated. And it has taken most of my time and writing energy. But I'm really happy with how it's turning out, and I'm in the editing process now with my publisher, Chelsea Green, and I'm excited to get it out into the world, so stay tuned. And happy solstice season. If you pop something on New Year's, consider making it something local and organically farmed. And may you all get some much-deserved rest, except those of you in Australia, New Zealand, Chile, Argentina, Bolivia, South Africa, basically all y'all down south. You hopefully have happy plants to play with, and your season is in full swing. I hope it's going well, and I wish you a beautiful vintage. I'm incredibly grateful for all of you who listen to and support Beyond Organic Wine, who engage with me in these ideas, and who make what I do possible. 2025 for me was a year of learning how important and how large my community is, and producing Embracing Hybrid Grapes has once again shown me this, and that's a big part of why it starts with embracing. Thank you for including me in your community. I started this by saying I love wine. What I didn't expect over 20 years ago when I fell in love with wine was that it would lead me to reconnect with the source of everything, that it would unmask Gaia and reveal the mystery that transforms into a million expressions of movement and awareness, that dances in the dark of the void, sparking light with a click of its heels, and births a trillion stars from its desire for us to recognize that it is in this moment and every moment, and that we sip not from a glass, but from an ocean of life becoming alive in us again. Until next year, thank you, and happy holidays. Hey, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you joining in to these podcasts. If you'd like to support these podcasts, probably the best way to do that is to just join Substack as a paid subscriber at beyondorganicwine.substack.com. It also gives you access to all the paid episodes and other content that I will be releasing on Substack. And I also want to thank Colden Pro for this beautiful closing music.